We have been working with the Human Rights Clinic at the University of Edinburgh, and our report details quite unique opportunities for further supporting children's rights in Scotland. And we're looking at that specifically in terms of right to a healthy environment. 3 of us are presenting today, as I said, as well as, I also want to mention that Casey is here, who is our professor and also the head of the LLM Human Rights Program at the University of Edinburgh. If you have any questions during the presentation, we ask you to write them actually in the chat, and then we'll have an opportunity at the end of the webinar for a short question and answer and discussion session. First, I'd like to just outline the key aspects of our report, and it's also covering, of course, the main content of the webinar today. We're looking, first of all, really at the importance of children's right to a healthy environment and how it impacts every area of children's lives. We also want to look at what the fulfillment of the right to a healthy environment actually entails. Although we have an extensive international framework that provides both hard and soft law obligations for states and private actors, there are still significant barriers that persist. And what we found in our comparative study is that enhancing participation and access to justice are the key ways that we can improve that. Our report details broad recommendations of what incorporating a healthy environment could look like in terms of legislative and also procedural provisions, especially linked to national practice in Scotland. But our ultimate purpose here is actually to have a lively discussion and to also inspire all of Together's members, also the institutional actors here in Scotland, and to also enhance that collaboration for a better realization of children's rights. And after the webinar, hopefully we will all better understand the importance of a healthy environment to actually fulfilling human rights. Also looking at this relationship, this key relationship between children's rights and a healthy environment. And then of course, finally, how it impacts national policies and practice and what key opportunities there are for placing children's rights at the center. So before going further, I'd like to define precisely what we mean by a healthy environment. And it's enshrined by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Realizing the right to a healthy environment actually means that children and young people are thriving, that they're safe, they're healthy, and that they're developing in order to fulfill their greatest potential. And in terms of clarifying why it's really critical to focus on right to healthy environments, it's because of 4 key things. First is that there's been insufficient global governmental response to rampant environmental destruction. And this is such as accelerated global climate change, unprecedented biodiversity loss, natural resource exploitation, and also significant exposure to all of us of toxins, waste, and pollution. And this gravely impacts the realization of human rights, and especially for children. The reason why children and young people are uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of environmental harm is because their bodies and minds are continuously evolving, as well as the fact that their agency is often overlooked and dismissed by policy and decision makers. In our comparative study, we found that looking at different ways that states are translating and implementing children's right to a healthy environment, that there was really this emphasis needed on enhancing children's participation, including access to justice, specifically in environmental issues. And lastly, although many states are using environmental education, for example, to promote participation, the right to be heard is actually gaining quite a bit of importance as children are now recognized as critical agents of change. And the ability of children to pursue also effective remedies for environmental harm is still in its developmental stages. And as will be discussed later in the presentation by Mercy, there are still critical challenges that impede the judicial process. And another key point of why we're focusing on this topic and also the webinar today is that focusing on the right to healthy environment is timely and it's also pragmatic. And this is because we're harnessing current national and actually also international momentum in the promotion and protection of children's rights and a healthy environment. And we also would like to support, along with together, the recent adoption of the UNCRC incorporation bill. And lastly, recently the Scottish government took the first and a very crucial step towards recognizing the importance to a healthy environment by accepting the recommendations of the Human Rights Task Force report. And this expressly recommended the adoption of a right to a healthy environment within Scottish law. And then I also want to highlight our approach in our report. And what we did in our report is that the key part was to actually link to national practice. In our report, which is a comprehensive legal and policy analysis of global experience and guidance, we outlined 10 key recommendations, and that's actually available in the chat in a PDF file. That's just a draft since we haven't published the report yet. But we just wanted you to be able to see what they were. And these are concrete next steps and concrete opportunities for Scotland to take action and to ensure a healthy environment for all citizens, which is also, of course, adults, children, and future generations alike. And so in these linked to national practice, and there's an example here of one of them on the slide, these are summarized in these 10 key recommendations that you will see in your handout. And as we think about looking at national practice here from a child's rights perspective, there are actually 4 key areas that I can just highlight in how a healthy environment could actually look in Scotland. And one is continued increased measures for proactively involving children in national environmental decision-making. Second is to formally recognize children and young people as empowered agents of change. Third, and this is very important, is to hold businesses and non-state actors accountable for the environmental harms that are affecting children. And lastly is enhanced and child-friendly access for children to the Scottish legal system and appropriate remedies for environmental and climate change cases. So I'd like to illuminate reasons why focusing on specific areas of the environment are actually critical to children and young people, and in fact to all of us. As we say in our report, it's greatly due to the unhealthy environment that affects us all today. And I'm not sure if you all know that no greater threat exists to the world's 2.2 billion children, which is in fact a third of our global population, as well to future generations, than the current climate crisis that we're facing. And this climate crisis is primarily caused by greenhouse gas emissions. As a principal generator of global greenhouse gas emissions, it's business activities that actually gravely impact the environment that children live and grow up in. And thus, they represent the most significant and constant challenge to a healthy environment. Furthermore, the full realization and enjoyment of fundamental human rights ultimately actually hinges on a healthy environment. And we all know actually that an unhealthy environment can be prevented. For example, the World Health Organization found in 2015 that of the 5.9 million deaths of children under 5, that more than 1.5 million deaths could have actually been prevented. And this is through reduction of many different kinds of environmental risks, such as air pollution, unsafe water, inadequate sanitation, hygiene, and the rampant use of toxic chemicals. And actually the absolute criticality of prevention will also be highlighted throughout this presentation. And if you look at the impacts of environmental harm, specifically on children and young people, these drastic temperature changes, which are combined with this diminished quality of air, food, and water, actually has severe, far-reaching, and irreversible implications in long-term health, development, and overall well-being which has severe implications also for physical, mental health, and also development. And compared to adults, children experience unique environmental harms because they have little or no control over these threats that they face. They also lack knowledge and ability to protect themselves. And as I mentioned before, while all populations are acutely experiencing the impacts of environmental harm, children are uniquely vulnerable, and they're at greatest risk because their minds, bodies, knowledge, and agency are continuously evolving. And also there are groups of children who are in vulnerable situations, particularly those who are disabled or come from indigenous, low income, and otherwise excluded communities, and they're at greatest risk, as these vulnerabilities are often intersecting in multiple dimensions. These children are disproportionately affected by exploitation and environmental destruction from business activities. And although international human rights law does not expressly recognize a substantive right to a healthy environment, an unhealthy environment actually directly threatens many fundamental rights. And these include right to life, right to health, right to water, and right to food. And thus, states are legally obligated to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights in the environmental context. And actually, these obligations are ensured in more than 80% of UN member states through national legislation, jurisprudence, and also regional treaties. Key sources of also environmental law, such as the Stockholm and Rio Declarations, and also the Aarhus Convention, connect environmental protection with human rights, and namely the right to life. Additionally, the relationship between children's rights and the environment is specifically recognized by international human rights bodies and jurisprudence. And the most significant is that the UNCRC is one of the few human rights instruments that explicitly imposes positive obligations on states to protect the environment. This also means that states should effectively monitor the private sector. And this is by identifying, preventing, and mitigating their impacts on the environment. Also specifically from a children's rights perspective, according to, for example, the Children's Rights and Business Principles. This is also further supported by the UNCRC requiring states to realize the children's right to the highest attainable standard of health by focusing on prevention of health impacts and mitigating exposure to environmental harm. And here, if we look at hard law versus soft law frameworks, although international human rights treaties don't impose direct legal obligations on the private sector, there has been quite a bit of progressive recent developments in critical soft law instruments that outline business responsibilities for respecting human rights. Some of these core soft law instruments include the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises, as well as the UN Global Compact. However, none of these prioritize or clarify specific responsibilities relating to children's rights. General comment number 16 by the Committee on the Rights of the Child also emphasizes state obligations to protect children from harmful business impacts, while the Children's Rights and Business Principles, which I just previously mentioned, is a voluntary guidance tool that we could actually also use here in Scotland, and it outlines positive obligations for businesses to meaningfully engage children. And lastly, before I pass over the webinar to Kira, I just want to highlight that the precautionary approach is a guiding principle of environmental law, which advocates for caution in the face of scientific uncertainty. And while the precautionary approach within customary national law is actually still evolving, it has been incorporated into international conventions, regional frameworks, soft law, and domestic laws worldwide. And it specifically holds that in situations where serious or irreversible threats to the environment or human health are possible, government policy and decision makers cannot just rely on uncertainty to forego proactive and preventative actions. The use of this precautionary approach by states when formulating environmental policies and regulations is absolutely essential. It ensures that steps are taken in the present to prevent future environmental harm. This approach is specifically appropriate for our research because it protects children's right to a healthy environment and also considers that the science concerning environmental impacts on children is very complex. It's less research and therefore is more uncertain compared to adults. So it's essential for states to apply the precautionary approach with a children's rights perspective to ensure healthy environment for the future. And while a complex cooperation between states, businesses, and communities is critical for children's access to a right to healthy environment, despite this very expansive international legal and non-legal protection and national incorporation here that we have, the severity and enormity of environmental degradation still ultimately challenges the ability of states to safeguard children's rights and meet international obligations. And children are still amongst the least empowered to exercise their rights of expression, obtain information, and access justice when their rights have been violated. So to guarantee that children are seen and heard effectively, we have found that states must specifically enhance participation and access to justice for children and young people. Kira will be further discussing the empowerment of children, as well as how ensuring the right to participation could look like for children and young people in Scotland.
So as Jeannie's just highlighted, states and businesses have a duty, but also opportunities to put a children's perspective at the forefront of the right to a healthy environment. And yet, in practice, children are not appropriately empowered to express themselves, obtain information, or access remedies for environmental harms. State policies and business operations often take a protective approach towards children, and this limits the understanding of children as a vulnerable group. This approach consequently hinders the capacity of children to protect themselves from environmental harms, undermines their competency and resilience, and obstructs their participation in environmental matters, thereby neglecting their abilities to be problem solvers. And in order to secure the child's right to a healthy environment, states and businesses must empower children and recognize their power as emancipated actors. And this necessitates ensuring their participation in environmental affairs and decisions. There we go. Children have long been recognized as critical agents of environmental change in a number of international sources. And in order to fulfill this role, children's participation in environmental affairs must be assured. The right to participation is guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and codified in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and most significantly for our purposes, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Notably, effective environmental participation requires, at a minimum, 7 elements. These are: first, education on the environment and its threats must be offered. Second, access to information must be ensured. Third, a voice in decision-making must be ensured. Fourth, transparency of decision-making must be guaranteed. Fifth, post-project analysis or monitoring must be conducted. Sixth, enforcement structures must be established. And seventh, recourse to independent tribunals for redress must be available. Of course, forward a bit there. Of course, the effective participation of children in environmental matters cannot be realized without support from state and non-state actors. In particular, we have highlighted 4 areas or avenues in which the participation of children in environmental issues must be ensured. These are environmental education, consideration of the views of children, information and assessment, and the provision of effective remedies or access to justice. These avenues are at the crux of children's rights to a healthy environment, and each brings a set of specific opportunities for Scotland to meet them. I, and Mercy after me, will go through them each in turn and offer examples of good practice Scotland can follow. But what has to be kept in mind is ultimately each of these avenues must meet 9 criteria in order to be meaningful for children. They must be transparent and informative, voluntary, respectful, accountable, relevant, safe and sensitive to risk, child-friendly, supported by training, and inclusive. Now, the first avenue by which children's environmental participation must be ensured is through environmental education. The 1972 Stockholm Declaration established that education in environmental matters is essential for the younger generations. Following this, UNCRC Article 29, Sub 1, Sub E provides that the education of children must be directed to the development of respect for the natural environment, while CRC General Comment 1 adds that it must encompass both national and international problems. However, education should not target children alone. The CRC General Comment number 16 states that states and the private sector must be given concrete guidance on how to ensure effective education. In our report, we have found that several states include environmental education as a focal point in national plans of actions, where they implement education tools tailored for various stages of schooling and train teachers on environmental education. We have identified New Zealand, for example, which is in the process of implementing a science-backed curriculum on the climate crisis, which includes educational materials that will help children participate in activism and also engage with their climate anxiety. The second avenue by which children's environmental participation must be ensured is through providing opportunities for children's views to be heard. The UNCRC Article 12 guarantees the right of children to be heard, and this is necessary because children provide distinctive and also invaluable perspectives and experiences. These perspectives and experiences must be taken into account in environmental decision-making and must be protected from reprisals. On one hand, the political process stands as a critical area in which children can be heard. And yet, the most basic form of democratic participation is unavailable to children in Scotland below the age of 16, meaning that children are underrepresented within the political decision-making process, unable to directly influence environmental policies as full constituents by electing authorities that respect their views. On the other hand, procedural means can also enhance the participation of children in environmental decision-making. Environmental impact assessments, or EIAs, are tools that could provide children an opportunity to participate and have their rights considered in decisions that evaluate the likely environmental impacts of projects. The use of EIAs is an obligation under international law, and while many states have legislation that require EIAs to be conducted for specific projects, traditionally the substance and extent of public consultation within these assessments is not typically established. This leaves open the question of who can participate and what issues they can speak. The participation of children in these assessments is typically lacking because, unlike adults, they are not recognized as being autonomous or emancipated actors. In our report, however, we have identified Norway and Sweden, and particularly the city of Stockholm, as examples where children's rights and perspectives are explicitly incorporated and integrated into impact assessment regulations and the planning and development processes. There we go. Now, the third avenue by which children's environmental participation must be ensured is through the provision of environmental information and assessment. UNCRC Article 13 says that children have the right to seek and receive information. This right allows children the ability to effectively exercise their right to participation, especially in regards to a healthy environment. Following this right, states have an obligation to collect, update, and protect information gained through environmental impact assessments and to guarantee public access. But most importantly, states must also ensure that this information is child-friendly and age-appropriate. As an example of good practice, we've identified Serbia's Eco-Register, which is an online public database that provides access to educational materials, EIAs, environmental information, and monitoring plans for private companies. Of course, ultimately, information should not only concern tools for environmental education or environmental assessments, but must also clarify how children can participate in decision-making processes, and how they can access justice to the violations of their rights caused by environmental harms. Now, within our report, we've identified our opportunities for Scotland to enhance children's participation in environmental affairs, specifically focusing on education, information, and expression and engagement. On the whole, it's been recognized that current participation mechanisms in Scotland are largely ineffective in ensuring that children from diverse and intersectional backgrounds can exercise their rights and influence environmental decisions that affect them. From this, we first recommend that a maximalist approach in incorporating children's participation be taken. This necessarily requires the engagement of children from diverse backgrounds. Such engagements can be encouraged during the Scottish Government's annual cabinet meeting with children and young people, and even within the Scottish Youth Parliament. In terms of education, we recommend that environmental education in Scotland be developed through engagement from children following existing educational initiatives, such as the Young Leaders of Learning program and the MAP Do Review method. We also recommend that forums, such as environmental themed panels, be implemented in schools and local council areas for children to share and address their environmental concerns with local and national policymakers. Scottish children have also pointed out the existence of barriers to sharing their voices, based on factors such as poverty, parental control, and the protective paradigm employed by adults that characterize them as needing to be protected rather than listened to as agents of change. In order to support their right to be heard, we recommend that the Scottish Government and national and local organizations establish comprehensive guidelines for gathering, incorporating, and sharing the input of children in political and business sector decision-making. Information on environmental decisions and resources for participation must also be accessible to children through age-appropriate language. And finally, while Scotland currently uses children's rights and well-being impact assessments to identify, research, and analyze anticipated impacts of proposed laws, policies, or measures, these assessments do not consider environmental factors. As such, we recommend that environmental impacts be specifically addressed within CRWIAs and that children's rights be considered within EIAs as well. Now, the fourth and final avenue by which children's environmental participation must be ensured is through access to justice, and I will pass it off to Mercy to discuss this avenue.
At this point, I'll discuss access to justice for children where their right to a healthy environment is being infringed. Next, I'll look at the challenges children face while trying to access justice. Further on, I'll explore examples from states, specifically Colombia, Canada, and Netherlands, where the court held in favor of the right of children to a healthy environment. I also look at non-judicial mechanisms that could serve as alternatives to court processes. Then I'll look at the role of relevant actors in ensuring a safe environment for children. And finally, I'll make recommendations as to the next steps Scotland could take to ensure that the right of children to a healthy environment is protected, and when infringed, to ensure that they have access to justice. Now, access to justice is an essential aspect of the right of children to participate in matters that affect them. It comes to play where states fail to prevent or mitigate environmental degradation and the impact of climate change. This ensures the provision of effective remedy where the rights of children are being violated, and recognizes the right to have equal and fair access to justice, the right to prompt and effective reparation for injuries sustained, the right to access information on justice procedure and mechanisms. Next slide, please. Now, despite the violation of the rights of children guaranteed under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, including the right to health and the right to life, by environmental harm and the impact of climate change, children still face challenges in obtaining remedy in courts. This include legal standing, deficits in legislation, and the causation of harm and burden of proof. For legal standing, children are deemed vulnerable individuals, and legal standing challenges the agency and capacity of a child to stand in court to establish an interest in a particular proceeding. An example of this could be seen in the case of Future Generations and the Ministry of Environment in Colombia, where the state challenged an action instituted by 25 children on the ground that the children did not have the capacity to represent themselves or future generation in a climate change case. Another challenge faced by children in assessing justice in court is deficit in legislation. Currently, there is no international framework that guarantees the right to a healthy environment. States have taken advantage of this gap to avoid taking appropriate steps to mitigate the impact of climate change and environmental degradation. They have also argued that the climate change policies and measures are within the remit of states, and as such, courts do not have the jurisdiction to interfere in the political question. Business actors, on the other hand, have taken advantage of this gap in legislation to avoid liability where their activities infringes on the rights of children. Mato and Ontario in Canada presents another example of this. In this case, the states argued that there is no law that provides for the rights to a stable climate, and the state was not required to ensure a stable climate. Another challenge faced by children in assessing justice is the causation of harm and burden of proof. Generally, in environmental litigation, a claimant will have to prove that the risk suffered was foreseeable to the defendant, in this case, the state or business actors, and that such defendant failed to prevent such risks. This has constituted a challenge for climate change litigations as the effects are not always quantifiable and the impacts occur over a long term. The case of Ugender Foundation and the state of Netherlands provides another example. Here, the states argued that the impact of climate change is futuristic and does not occur within the immediate remit, and as such, states are not supposed to take actions to mitigate climate change. Next slide, please. Now, next slide, please. Now, despite the challenges that the children and the claimant faced in these particular cases, the court still in these cases held that children have a right to stand in courts to defend their rights when it's being violated. They also held that environmental degradation and the impact of climate change violates the rights of children, and states have an obligation to take steps to protect the rights of children from being infringed by the impact of climate change and environmental harm. The court further held that children have a right to participate in measures adopted by states in mitigating climate change. Further on, the court held that despite climate policies and measures being within the remit of state powers, courts have a jurisdiction to protect the rights of children where state action or inaction infringes on these rights. Next slide, please. Now, from these cases, we have some recommendations as to ways to enhance access to justice for children. From our 4 recommendations, the first is that claimants should strategically use public interest litigation to obtain remedy for children where legal standing could constitute a challenge to a successful case. Secondly, the right to seek remedy for environmental harm and the impact of climate change should be recognized in law. Third, the provision of information on business activities should be made public to ensure that children have access to this information while trying to establish causation in courts. Fourthly, climate change litigation should adopt a human rights approach that emphasizes on the human rights threatened by the impact of climate change and not necessarily the particular injury suffered by children. Now, aside the court processes that could serve as an option to obtaining remedy, the non-judicial mechanisms also serve as alternatives. The first is the participation in public sphere. An example is the school strike for climate action started by Greta Thunberg. This has raised a lot of global awareness on the impact of climate change, both on children and on future generations. And it has also instigated global leaders to take actions in mitigating the impact of climate change. The second is the grievance mechanisms in business sectors, recognized under the Child's Right and Business Principles and also the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. It provides guidelines for businesses to establish a child-sensitive and non-judicial grievance mechanisms to provide remedy where the activities of businesses violate the rights of children. Next slide, thank you. Now, relevant actors have role to play Relevant actors have role to play in ensuring a safe environment for children. For states, they are to ensure that they enforce international treaties that protects the environment and human rights. They should also enact legal framework that protects the rights of children to a healthy environment. Further on, states should provide and regulate information on the measures states are taking to combat the impact of climate change and also on business activities that impact the rights of children. Business actors, on the other hand, should ensure that they respect soft law provisions that protects the fundamental rights, especially the fundamental rights of children. They could also influence other business actors to act ethically and in a manner that respects human rights and also protects the environment. Businesses should also abide by the due diligence provisions on reporting, transparency, and accountability. Communities also could empower children to participate in local affairs, especially as it relates to the protection of the environment. They should also provide information and education on the environment and also support children to engage in climate change activism. As we have been discussing, environmental degradation violates the rights of children and also endangers the well-being of children. Scotland could ensure that it protects children by adopting the following recommendations. For our first recommendation, Scotland should recognize the rights to a healthy environment in its laws. Secondly, make information on the steps states are taking to mitigate climate change and also environmental impact assessments accessible to the public in a child-friendly manner. Our third recommendation is for Scotland to update the Child's Rights and Wellbeing Impact Assessments to include environmental impact assessment. Our fourth recommendation is for the incorporation of climate and environmental education into the school curriculum of children and young people. Our fifth recommendation is for the voices of children to be included in climate change policies and measures taken by states to mitigate both environmental degradation and the impact of climate change. And finally, we recommend that Scotland provide a forum of engagement where children and young people could discuss on the impact of climate change and also proffer a solution that helps to protect both the environment and also ensure that the rights of children recognized in the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child is being guaranteed. Thank you so much for joining us today and listening, and we'll now attend to your questions.
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. It's the second time I've seen it, but I just learn more every time I hear you present, and it's such a wealth of work that has gone into it. So yeah, thank you so much. We do now have 10 minutes for questions to the panel. If anybody from anyone attending wants to ask any questions. I've seen already we've had one from Teresa Casey. And she wants to ask you, she was involved in the day of discussions. The UN committee had a day of discussion on children's rights to a healthy environment, and Teresa was involved with that with the Children's Parliament back in 2016. The hope from that day was that the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child would actually come out with a general comment on children's rights to a healthy environment, but that hasn't happened yet. So Teresa wants to ask you whether you think, well, whether you've got a view on whether a general comment would add value to work to progress children's rights to a healthy environment. Don't know if any of you want to come back on that one. If I can maybe just come in just to say, there was actually last year, the Human Rights Council published a resolution to advance children's rights to a healthy environment. And this was really seen as landmark. I've just put a link into chat so that people can have a look at it. And the resolution itself really draws from the UNCRC, and I mean, I know you've obviously cited it in your report, but I think this is a really important first step of making sure that there's this really strong link between children's rights to a healthy environment and the UNCRC. But from my perspective, then we would definitely value having an additional general comment on children's rights to a healthy environment, because it really helps to articulate why environmental rights are children's rights and vice versa. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that question. No, we've had lots and lots of thank yous in the chat, yeah, some really, really strong endorsements of your work. I have had another question as to whether this is more of a practical one. Is it okay if we share the slides from your presentation afterwards as well as the report? Yeah, fantastic. And so yeah, I'll definitely be doing that. Well, we've got a question from Amelia, who's from the Environmental Rights Centre in Scotland. She wants to know, how are you presenting your findings to Scottish Government and the Parliament? Because at the Environmental Rights Centre, they're pushing for the right to a healthy environment, and she would love to be able to link up on this. She says it's a fabulous presentation. So maybe if I just come in on that first, I know you're not going to be presenting directly to the Scottish Government and to the Scottish Parliament, although I think we do actually have a few government officials here today. But it's something that we're going to be integrating it together into our work, particularly the work taking forward the recommendations of the Human Rights Task Force. We're going to be absolutely drawing from your report and from the recommendations of your report to inform some of the parliamentary work that we'll be doing to advocate for children's rights in a healthy environment, and obviously linking it into some of the work that our members are doing ahead of COP as well this autumn, when all eyes are going to be on Glasgow to see what steps are going to be taken internationally to protect the right to an environment. I don't know if anybody from the group wants to come in and add anything to that. No, I think the agreement was very much actually that you guys were working on the report, and then it's our job to do a lot of the parliamentary work and the government work, and we'll certainly be feeding back to the students to let them know what impact this report has had.
Juliet?
Sorry, was that another question? I can't see everybody on the screen.
Yeah, sorry, Juliet, it's Casey. I was just going to piggyback on what you just said.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
And I think particularly because we've obviously worked with quite a few, with Amelia and quite a few of the other NGOs that are on here. And I think what's important is, I mean, Together is going to be obviously publicizing the findings and spreading it far and wide. And I think what's important, and this kind of links back into the general comment question, is obviously one of the things we've been pushing for has been to ensure that there's a broad interpretation toolkit that could be used. So I think the more that we cross-reference between different reports and different findings and all the research that's been done, and particularly all of the research that this group has put into this particular project, I think that helps expand our knowledge base, and also helps reinforce how all of these different issues link together in terms of the work that the task force and the government has agreed to take forward. So I think that that's one of the ways that we can do that, is just by interlinking all of these different research and knowledge bases. So, sorry.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, no, thank you, Casey. That's really helpful. And I see there are a lot of comments actually coming up about children's rights to a healthy environment, and having a general comment from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Helen from the Children's Commissioner's Office has helpfully said that the resolution that we included a link to actually invited the UN Committee to consider a new general comment. So that's very exciting. And Loreen has come in to say the recent submissions of climate action films made by young people for Keep Scotland Beautiful and Screen Scotland would also indicate that a general comment from children would be valued. Helpfully, Teresa Casey has come in saying that she's picking up on the question of a general comment with Ted is on, who are the main NGO players in the day of discussion. And I have to say, knowing Teresa Casey's advocacy skills and prowess, she was really strongly behind there being a general comment on the right to play. So if she's going to be taking this forward as an issue, I think we're in really good hands there. So anything, Teresa, that we can do to help you with your advocacy to try and get a general comment on the right to a healthy environment, we'd be super happy to do this. Amelia from the Environmental Rights Centre has helpfully said that she can highlight anything that we want on the Environmental Rights Centre Scotland's blog, and so we'll definitely follow up on that. So do expect some blogs from this work. I think that would be a really exciting way to really amplify the work that the students have done. And lots more thank yous. So Josh Brown has said it's really good to have mention of the actions that can be taken. He works for the One World Centre in Dundee, and it'd be great to incorporate some of the findings into educations more, so that teachers are more aware of some of this work. I think that's absolutely key. We've got 5 more questions. If anyone wants to come in with any questions, if you want to ask questions in person rather than through chat, does anybody want to come in and make any final comments or questions? I can't actually see anybody's hands, and so do just come in if you've got something that you want to add.
Hi, I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, come in.
Yeah, so I was wondering, you talked a lot about education, and I think that's really important. And I was wondering if you think that kind of how climate justice movements develop education within themselves, or can be used to educate people, could be fed into increasing education around climate change issues within schools, and how that would work, and what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. Do any of the presenters want to come in to answer that?
Yeah, I could answer that.
That'd be great, Mercy.
Yeah, one of the examples we gave in from our research reports is the fact that some countries are actually not just using education as a way of more like advocating for justice for children, but they are also incorporating it in their curriculum to ensure that education is not just for children on the impacts of climate change, but also for the teachers as well, to ensure that the general public is actually aware that it's not just to educate children, but also educate the teachers and actually educate the public as well to keep promoting mitigation measures on climate change, and ensure that states actually take steps to ensure that children's rights are being protected.
Thank you, Mercy. I think that's a really important point, and I think the more that can be done across Scotland to make sure that there is that emphasis that environmental rights are everybody's rights, and it needs to be in schools, but it needs to be right across communities as well, then I think that's the only way that we're really going to achieve the kind of culture change that we're looking for here. We've had some more comments about requests for blogs and things like that, and so we will most definitely do everything that we possibly can to make sure that we send blogs far and wide, and I will follow up with the class about that. And obviously you guys, you're at the end of your very hard work of doing this as your main project for your masters, and so we don't want to apply you too much more work, so together we'll be very happy to help write blogs, as well as us coming to you guys to get you to do yet more work after you finish this amazing project. So yeah, we could follow up and have conversations about that afterwards. So I think we're kind of coming to the end of today's event. I just want to say what a great big huge thank you to you all, and what a privilege it has been to work with you. It's a real occasion to work with the Human Rights Clinic, because it's such an opportunity for us at Together to learn so much more about children's rights and environmental rights. And this report, I know, is really going to keep us going. It's going to keep us really busy over the next couple of years, as the emphasis on children's rights to a healthy environment in Scotland is really increased. And as I've said in the class before, it's such a opportune time at the moment where we do have a commitment from the Scottish Government to incorporate the right to a healthy environment. And so through that work, we can really try to make sure that children's rights, children's voices and children's participation are at the absolute heart of every step that's taken to really make this a reality. So yeah, no, thank you. It's been a privilege to work with you all. And we will send out your full report. We'll send it to the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to environment and see what comments he has to say. And we'll share it widely with our members, and we'll let you know what feedback they've got. So yeah, if we just finish there with a huge thank you for everybody for coming along, and to all of you for such brilliant work. Well done, and thank you.